Hello and welcome to the 14th and maybe the final, but probably not, 18 Brumaire Livestream. We have quite a full panel here today. We have all from stateside, or at least America's side. Let's start at the top. We've got Hellfire and Varnation. Derek, how's it going?
I'm struggling with the mute button. I'm doing fine here in the National Liberation Front of Deseret. And
of what?
Deseret. Dude, you didn't know that like the Mormons invented their own language and own pseudo mythology, and like they called this country Deseret, that they were going to kind of like steal from Mexico, but got stolen by the United States first. So I'm here to support Norteño culture and return Deseret to its true roots, and then abandon it to its Mormon theocrats. That's what I'm doing tomorrow.
It'll be pretty cool when we have the disintegration of America. We can that'll be definitely one of the states, and it'll go up and it'll go all the way into Canada, where Kyle, you are. Is it going to reach all the way up to where you are?
I mean, I feel like the Mormons are way better organized than anyone else around here, so probably. I wouldn't be happy about it. I would definitely have to leave, but it could happen. It could happen.
Here's hoping.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. How's Derek? Are you suffering from the smoke down there too? How's everybody doing? We're all in the West. How's everyone doing?
So, believe it or not, because we're having weird weather patterns here, we have our own smoke, but we actually believe that like New York is getting more smoke than Salt Lake is, because the air currents are taking it up into Canada and then back across the United States and all the way to Europe. So the southern West is not getting as much of it.
Okay.
Like we're literally to cut off. If like you go up just slightly up towards Idaho, like you can't breathe. It's like the worst air quality on earth. But we have our own fires here, so there's that. That's fun. But but luckily we're deserty and all that. Once it burns through some sagebrush, it doesn't tend to matter very much.
Okay, it's pretty bad here today, so I may get a little weird in the voice. But at least we haven't become a Mormon theocracy, so that's a plus.
Never mind the air quality. What about the hair quality down here in Arizona? Look at that. Esri and Sophia, how's it going?
Doing great, Tom.
Do you like that intro? That was a good one.
Excellent.
Professionally. These
segues are pro segues, Tom.
You got the fire segues today, and I'm really appreciating it.
Yeah. Doing great.
Fire segues, no pun intended.
So, I used to live in San Francisco, and every year Market Street would be covered in soot and ash, and the fires were visible for a little bit, and then the sky would turn orange for half the week. So I've kind of had my fill of that. In Phoenix right now, skies are clear, hearts are golden, can't lose. And I don't know, nothing important I can think of note happened last evening.
We just slept.
I mean,
soundly, without a care in the world.
Yeah, went out, had a few Romulan ales, and nursing a little bit of a hangover, but feeling really good actually. Feeling great. Can't think of any national things that I'm real upset about.
No one important died that I can think of.
I can't think of anyone.
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
What do you call it? The only thing we ever get over here is Sahara sand. Sometimes the sand actually blows all the way from the Sahara to Ireland.
Oh wow! I didn't know.
The next morning,
we used to have that in not from Sahara, but from China, because of the desertification. We had sand blowing in Japan every year. And it got pretty bad.
We used to call it yellow dust season. It was a mixture of
same in Japan. Yeah,
of Moby Desert and this was in Korea, and Moby Desert sand mixed with local smog, and I would go out with N95 masks most of the spring because I'd cough up black shit if I didn't. And like also when I lived in Cairo, like the air was just fire and sand. I mean, like you would clean out your nose and it would just be like, that's not human. Like,
God.
So yeah, it's and they don't list it as having very bad air quality because no one measures it. Like, there's no one there to see how bad it is. So yeah.
I mean, I bet you on Weather Underground, someone's got like a little makeshift like MacGyvered like home networking kit that's like showing the air quality or something. You ever go on Weather Underground, the Web 2.0 weather app that's tragically farcically named after the 1960s soft terrorist group? Yeah, shit rolls.
Yeah, it's a very curious branding decision, but
it sure is.
I guess they became one of the most popular weather apps around. So
it's a really good app. You can get like your like local forecasts and conditions like way better than anything else. So free advertising.
This has been our ad for Weather Underground.
Yeah, payment when Weather Underground. Payment when.
Yeah, I mean,
we should hit them for We should hit them for funding. Let's be honest.
All these commie cucks wanted some like State Department to pay them off. Me, I'm just looking for the right IPO. Let's go. Give me that. Give me that tech money.
I tell you, didn't the Bolsheviks have like billionaire backers at some point? Like, probably Germans.
I don't know, man.
Probably Germans. I know that there are right wing conspiracies about that, but they're right wing conspiracies about everything.
It was the Germans that put Lenin on that train.
Well, that's just true. They actually did, but like,
what about? Did you say right-wing conspiracy theories? What are you talking? Are you drinking whiskey straight from the bottle?
No, I'm not drinking whiskey. This is tea. Although it doesn't like
it's Tahava brand tea. It's a high quality unsweetened tea. Yeah, I can vouch for it.
Although it does look like a 40, so
that's why I like it. It's a 32 ounce actually.
Yeah. But if you took the label off, it would be hard to tell this from Mad Dog 2020. So
you've yet to enjoy the wonders of Buckfast. It makes you fuck fast. Has anybody ever had Buckfast?
No.
What? I'm afraid not. Now, what kind of fuck fast do you mean?
Yeah, do you mean you finish faster or?
I mean, I'm pretty sure it's the like get fucked fast.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, totally get fucked fast, and it's made by in like an abbey by some monks somewhere in England, and it's this tonic wine. Seriously, it's a tonic wine that's about 15%, and they lace it with taurine, basically like Red Bull mixed with like 15, so it's like fortified wine, and you buy a bottle of it. It was really cheap, about £700, and you drink it, and I swear to God, better than drugs. It was better than drugs. It was
a little like.
Is that what the monks take too? Is that what the monks take too?
Well,
keep our mind on holy things.
Yeah.
Tanya, when I drink it, I'd be away for like fucking about 8 hours. You would be nearly in a state of like, it was much better than taking Coke or anything like that.
So you're telling me that Buckfast is like monastic for loco?
Yes, it's what it sounds like.
Yeah, and there's a place. You can go on YouTube. There's a kind of one of these meme things on YouTube of people downing a bottle of Buckfast and like in one go. It's not pretty, but like there's a place in Glasgow, and it's actually called Buckfast Triangle, and it's like these three neighborhoods like they form a triangle, and apparently it consumes like an incredible amount of Buckfast.
I have dealt with Glaswegians when I lived in North Africa, and they can drink. Holy crap. Although you can't understand them when they drink because they speak Glaswegian, which I suppose is a form of English, but no one else on earth seems to be able to translate them.
Glaswegian? Is this like Norwegians in Glasgow?
No, that's what it is a particular Scotch dialect that I swear to you is its own language.
Glasgow is tough.
Like I would drink with Glaswegians when I lived in Cairo, in our shitty North African beer that we could only get in certain places. And they would start speaking like local cant to me, and I would just, I couldn't understand a word. Like, it's not a word.
Subtitles. Yeah.
What do you call it? Precious's one of my Precious's best friends from college. He's Kyle. You might actually have heard of him. He apparently he designs like the most popular like role playing game app or something. I can't remember the name of it now, but like he's actually just does it himself. Like, but it's apparently really popular in the role playing kind of universe. But I can't remember the name of it. But he has his idea for a book series. Like one of them is like it's like Scots in space.
I'm looking forward to this one.
There's a whole series of these. He has them all like laid out, but he hasn't written any of them yet. But it sounds like a fucking brilliant idea. Scots in space. Okay, Jimmy.
All I know is whenever I think about like having proletarian like hordes, they all are Scottish in my head. They just are like they, like
that's a compliment. Scottish
I think as far as like European proles go, they could probably like take apart anything if they set their mind to it. I just don't know why they haven't yet. But I also feel that way about the Irish. So, who knows?
The Scots have got the best. The Scots have got an incredible ability to be coarse. Like,
oh my god,
they're the crudest bastards ever. They're brilliant. From how we have Emmanuel,
Captain O'Brien. I've just detected the Bork.
His head
open the hailing frequency.
I don't know what angle.
Can speak French. No,
Diplomacy
is irrelevant.
The angle from your camera as well really does like make your head look very large. It's so it's like there we go. No, it's how are you, Emmanuel?
I am fantastic. Glad to finally be back with you guys. I'm sorry I'm late to the party, but
you're you notice how
if I know you guys well enough, you just got started anyway. So
no, we haven't.
12 minutes into the podcast. Yeah, we're still bullshitting. Yeah,
I show up an hour late, and you're like 12 minutes in. This is fantastic. This is why I love you.
Said Marx for the first time on this podcast right now.
Okay,
good to see you.
Right,
great to see you guys too. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, we better get started then after all our shit talk,
our shenanigans.
Okay. Our shenanigans. Okay. Kyle was thinking this would be our last one, but god damn it, Mark's pulled it out with a bit of a banger chapter right at the end. Eh, Kyle?
Yeah, this is not going to be a one and done situation.
Yeah, I just read it. And
this is dense.
This is
serious.
good.
It's fucking really good.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's mostly just a series of dunks.
I feel like it's largely dunks. Yeah.
It's largely dunks, but there's a lot of actual theorizing that's going on here too.
Yeah. There's something like a theory of class here, like almost explicitly, which is, Marx talks a lot about class, but not explicitly. Like,
normally it's dialectically bracketed out to define any goddamn thing. So
or it'd be like, I'm going to define class now. Ugh. At the end of capital manuscript.
But I like that with him. I'm like, I like the fact that he's like, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, though. Like, come on, capitalists. You know,
the last 100
bourgeoisie. You know,
that his confidence
come on.
is misplaced.
All right,
shall we?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I was just eating some noodles. Okay.
You turn off the camera and deprived us of this anyway.
Yeah, I'm a fucking sloppy eater. Don't you know it? Right. So we're here finally at chapter 7, the last chapter, which is a kind of a closing chapter where he wraps up a lot of the stuff and gives us his kind of analysis of the class nature of Bonaparte's actual rule. So let's kick it off here in the first couple of paragraphs here, where he kind of just wraps up what's after happening. Normally we go to Kyle. Kyle, how do you feel about kicking off?
Sure. I mean, I think my voice is only going to get worse because of the smoke, so it's good to start early.
Okay, yeah.
All right, so...
all the way down to before our eyes, so the first three.
Right.
Yeah.
The social republic appeared as a phrase, as a prophecy, on the threshold of the February Revolution. In the June days of 1848, it was drowned in the blood of the Paris proletariat, but it haunts the subsequent acts of the drama like a ghost. The Democratic Republic announces its appearance. It is dissipated on June 13, 1849, together with its deserting petty bourgeois, but in its flight it redoubles its boastfulness. The parliamentary republic, together with the bourgeoisie, takes possession of the entire state. It enjoys its existence to the full. But December 2nd, 1851, buries it to the accompaniment of the anguish cry of the coalesced royalists. Long live the Republic! The French bourgeoisie balked at the domination of the working proletariat. It has brought the Lumpenproletariat to domination, with the chief of the Society of December 10th at its head. The bourgeoisie kept France in breathless fear of the future terrors of red anarchy. Bonaparte discounted this future for it when, on December 4th, he had the eminent bourgeois of the Boulevard Montmartre and the Boulevard des Italiens shot down at their windows by the drunken army of law and order. The bourgeoisie apotheosized the sword. The sword rules it. It destroyed the revolutionary press. Its own press is destroyed. It placed popular meetings under police surveillance. Its salons are placed under police supervision. It disbanded the Democratic National Guard. Its own National Guard is disbanded. It imposed a state of siege. A state of siege is imposed upon it. It supplanted the juries by military commissions. Its juries are supplanted by military commissions. It subjected public education to the sway of the priests. The priests subject it to their own education. It jailed people without trial. It is being jailed without trial. It suppressed every stirring in society by means of state power. Every stirring in its society is suppressed by means of state power. Out of enthusiasm for its money bags, it rebelled against its own politicians and literary men. Its politicians and literary men are swept aside, but its money bag is being plundered now that its mouth has been gagged and its pen broken. The bourgeoisie never tired of crying out to the revolution what St. Arsenius cried out to the Christians. Fuge tasse quiesce. Flee, be silent, keep still. Bonaparte cries to the bourgeoisie, Fuge tasse quiesce. The French bourgeoisie had long ago found the solution to Napoleon's dilemma. In 50 years, Europe will be Republican or Cossack. It solved it in the Cossack Republic. No Circe using black magic has distorted that work of art, the bourgeois republic, into a monstrous shape. That republic has lost nothing but the semblance of respectability. Present-day France was already contained in the parliamentary republic. It required only a bayonet thrust for the bubble to burst and the monster to leap forth before our eyes.
Marx can write. Marx can write.
Yeah, when he puts his damn mind to it, his pen is pretty ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, he doesn't put his damn mind to it that much after 1860 something. So
yeah, it's because he's like, let's try to reform calculus. Okay, like
I don't know. I've been reading a lot of the theories of surplus value that he wrote towards the end of his life, and he is, oh my god, he is so clear and just slam dunk debunk after slam dunk debunk, and it's just a joy to read.
I'll give you theories of surplus
like,
value. That's funny. Like,
yeah, but other than that, yeah. I mean, you got.
I'm about to say we shall not mention most of Capital Volume 3.
Volume 2 is worse.
Yeah. I mean, I think Volume 3 is clear and snappy compared to 2, but yeah. It's kind of like the reverse trilogy, where like Volume 2 is definitely not The Empire Strikes Back.
True. And Return of the Jedi is like, wow, that was actually pretty substantial.
Oh yeah, now you explained how everything fucking happened and how the Force works.
What a bunch of nerds! All right,
the value form as Force. As the
value form moves through all things.
Oh my god!
Yeah. Is there a light side of the value form? Anyway,
the dialectic,
the MMT.
Oh my god! I'm sure you saw that.
We shall not mention that.
Joined the dark side, baby.
Yeah.
Deseret and Sweden are united against you now, so it's not.
That's Ice Cube and Tom O'Brien. I don't know.
Anything is proceeding as I have foreseen.
Actually, I don't know. 90s Ice Cube, I would have put my money on, but like TV cop dad Ice Cube, maybe not. Anyway, so what do we have here? We have a funny tale of the bourgeoisie basically emboldening the state to kick its own ass.
Yeah.
There's just a side of my brain that's like, oh yeah, this is kind of like when the SPD set up the Freikorps to kill the communists, and then or emboldened the Freikorps to kill the communists, and then the Freikorps killed them. Like, whoops.
So the moral of this story is be very careful with the petit bourgeois and the Lumpenproletariat, because they can go all over the place and cause lots and lots and lots of havoc.
Yep. As we've seen again and again, it's a dangerous game. Is there anything that's... Go on, Derek.
No, it's interesting to me, though, that like leftists trying to use the Lumpen as a main force is like a constant theme of modern left theorizing, is like how to get Lumpen on the side of the left, since the proletariat won't do what we want it to. And I'm just like, so you're going to pick an even more unstable force that has all kinds of counter incentives to be weird because they're desperate, like, but not in a way that... Anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, if I continue this, someone's going to call me a reactionary, but like...
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Like, if there was anything I took with me about the Lumpenproletariat stuff in the Brumaire, it's that all the talk about, we got to reach out to the disenfranchised people that Trump reached out to. Like, all of that is fucking bullshit.
Well, that's bullshit.
Why we don't need them on our side? They never were on our side, and it's just fascinating how like this whole thing begins with. So I don't know if it's in the English preface, but in the Swedish preface, he's like, "So, hey guys, I'm Karl Marx. I'm going to tell you the story about how a clown came to power." Who no one took seriously, and now everything is fucked. He did that by partially using the Lumpenproletariat, and it's just so disheartening to see.
I mean, one of the things I'll say is it doesn't entirely rhyme because Trump is not really empowered by the Lumpenproletariat. He might be empowered by the Lumpen bourgeoisie. By that, I would mean like people with sketchy land deals and quasi mob connections. But like, which is its own special problem. But it's interesting to hear people.
He does name, at least in the Swedish translation, he does name like owners of gambling dens and pimps and brothel owners as part of the lumpen. So like, yeah.
The category. First of all, this category sucks. Like it's wildly inconsistent. Second of all, when you're in the United States and everything's been deindustrialized and all the jobs have been shipped and you're not left with much of a proletariat, and what you do have is like bought off by trade unions. Like, I think there is some problems with trying to make the lumpen like the main revolutionary subject. However, I understand why people go there, as from like the New Left Forward.
Yeah, because if you want to be like democratic, you're thinking about the majority of the population. The majority of the population is like fucked on the value for them. It's not like they don't have to work. It's just like everything's a hustle. So like, yeah, I mean, if we want a minoritarian, like, workerist, supremacist kind of like politics, then fine. But if we
but
want
that wasn't true when like the Panthers were. That wasn't true when the Panthers were saying that, and I actually don't believe it's true now.
It's fair about the Panthers, but I don't know. Like, look at trends in like mass underemployment, because we're not talking about people that are like. This is the thing: the line between Lumpenproletariat and proletariat proper is extraordinarily blurred, and that's like.
We're going to see more of that in this chapter when Marx tries to pin down exactly what the force was in Bonaparte's favor. It's quite vague. Like it's a coalition of things that he's trouble categorizing. So I think we're going to get into this some more.
The theory
Which,
that emerges,
by the way, totally rhymes with the political boundaries of today that are also kind of blurred.
The theory that emerges
what
in
the fuck are
total is
Christian
that Bonaparte
conservatives doing with the grab him by the pussy guy? Like, how did that dude get the female Christian vote? Like, it's shit's blurry, and it's always blurry.
I mean,
Supreme Court.
It's complicated, but the theory that's emerging here, or the perhaps the description, the theoretical description, it's like one part description, one part theory, right? Is that Bonaparte is of the Lumpenproletariat, led essentially a conspiracy of the Lumpenproletariat to hijack the state and give it some relative autonomy between classes. However, is ultimately expressing a decaying petty proprietor, small peasant class interest that cannot be expressed because it's being economically undermined. The latter part of that isn't here, but the conspiracy of the Lumpenproletariat is. So that's like a very weird class state nexus theoretical postulate.
Right. And I think that's actually very important for now, because I think if we really looked at the lumpen stuff, if and I'm actually going to insist on using the lumpen bourgeoisie, because like there's a difference between owning shit that's sketchy and gig working that's sketchy. There's a really big difference. That you might have lumpen bourgeoisie elements in the Trump coalition. I mean, particularly with all these like quasi mobbed up appointees and shit like that. That's real. But what the analysis of the supporters fails to get, that I mentioned Mike Lind, who actually does talk about this, is like you actually have strong petit bourgeois support for Trump in deracinated areas that have nothing to do with the cultural politics of it, really. It has to do with fear of the left and fear of losing what little tiny profits they have, and also, and we haven't talked about this, but it may apply. I don't know how much it applies in France. The brain drain of the cities from the periphery within the country, which has led to, since there are no jobs, everyone who's got any prospects at all runs to these cities to try to get into, higher skill proletariat and low key bourgeois jobs that are things that have professional incentives that depend on the state, and because that's where the work is, and that's where there's a fair amount of it. but only in those areas, which also like feeds a feedback loop where like it's not just that these people are, you know, I think actually like when we talk about right now, the whole like pedophilia, they're stealing our kids thing is actually like almost a fucked up subconscious metaphor for that, because these areas are losing their young like to these major cities, which also can't provide them, but when they come back they're culturally different. It's really increasing tensions, and I think there's a lot of like, if you wanted to take a psychoanalytic approach, which I don't often want to do actually, but like there's a lot of stuff going on in there. I wonder how much it rhymes. I would actually have to look at stuff beyond this text to know. Like I'd have to get like a good, like what was actually going on in the French countryside at the time.
Yeah.
To really make the comparison.
Yeah.
Moloch is eating our kids.
Yeah. Well, like one thing I think that'd be very wary of talking about Trump with like lumpen is that like if you were to actually go and analyze the lumpen in America, like most of them don't vote, and most of them, it's not like Trump got new voters.
Yeah,
really.
very true.
They're not new voters. It's just amplifying a different, basically PR strategy to attract those same voters, pretty much.
He also hasn't built a base of support around state employees in the way that Marx describes in this chapter. Like you could say, you know, like Homeland Security is maybe the closest thing you could see there to like the comparison of like what Marx says about these like lumpen people who find employment with the state and therefore are loyal to Bonaparte. But I feel like there's a distinction between these two cases here.
Honestly, if you want to,
I want to give my anecdotal evidence just to corroborate what Tom was saying. That like, I did some, you know, NGO work for like a few weeks before I took that job and shoved it, and was trying to do voter registration, and you know, where do like people who will fund voter registration want to, you know, what population do they want to get engaged? Well, you know, they stuck me next to the projects, right? And so like I can tell you there was very little fucking interest in registering to vote, and where there was interest, they were not allowed to vote because they were felons. So like this thing about the political, you know, the political expression of the lumpenproletariat is complete disengagement, if not disenfranchisement, in the United States.
Yeah.
And that's a really good point. I keep forgetting that you don't have universal suffrage in the United States. No, I mean, that is the truth. Our political scientists say we do, but it's like saying, oh, the unemployment rate, you know, it's just like a made up, you know, like ideological. Yeah, but it's not really universal suffrage. I guess there are just two things. Reading the Brumaire vis-a-vis like a strong man troll clown playing with the lumpen that worries me, and number one is this kind of shows that you know, if you can get the you know, drug dealers on the block on your side and conspire with them, you can do a lot of like scary shit. And also like what you said about them being disenfranchised, I take that to be kind of the case here as well, that they were disenfranchised, they were apolitical. Here comes this guy who gives them, you know, military uniforms, although they're not in the military, gives them champagne and sausage, and, you know, tries to convince them and get them on his side. And like it's a force you can tap into. It's an exploitable class, as it were. If you can tap into that kind of sentiment. So that's
proletariat by its very nature, it feels like, man, if only I could get exploited. Like that's the whole thing. Like they're locked out of the wage form.
Right. If I roll with this guy, I don't have to hustle.
Which let's talk about like the one legitimate point that Maoist had about this question is they would try to employ them, and it had mixed results. Like most of the time people would take to it, although occasionally they would also go in and shoot prostitutes. But the
also lumpen.
Yeah. The thing that I find interesting, though, is not so much the lumpen area of this, is when you have all these areas where you have hybrid and breakdown classes, which that does rhyme with now. Because when you look at like where commodity production is, that's not really in most of the developed world that much, except for Germany, weirdly. When you look at like, yes, there's a ton of commodities being made in the United States, but they're made by robots and by prisoners. Like,
services are commodities too, but like it's more than you're talking about the industrial stuff. Yeah, right. outside of military. In the UK, it's military is the only real industry that's really left. A little bit of car, but that's it.
I mean, we have more finishing products and stuff here than but it's mostly, it really is mostly done by robots. One of the things about like the Nagel appeals to this sort of thing and breaking back the traditional industrial working class that they want to do is like, it's not reshoring won't do it, because offshoring isn't even the primary problem. Like a lot of that manufacturing work has come back to the United States. It just doesn't employ anyone, not at scale. Like where it used to employ 5,000 people, it now employs 50, and can be way more productive. So the rate of exploitation is actually quite high. So like, I think that we have to be honest something about these weird hybrid positions, and then all these things that are dependent on the state. Because one thing I will say, no, Trump has not like done the state employee thing. Honestly, you know who did that in America? LBJ and FBR. That was their gig.
Yeah, the New Deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, and that's like why like the black community's always been big on government jobs, because it was like they could get them and get out of like quasi hustle, aka practically lumpen, job sectors. But like, as a side note, like we have all this breakdown with all these weird, like people try to do it with the PMC. They try to do it with all these other class theories right now. But what you really have is a bunch of people who are like working class part of the day, maybe depending on what's going on, or they're dependent on the state indirectly. And that includes a lot of the bourgeois class in America, because like, frankly, venture capital stuff is like so prompted up by the state right now that, I mean, and people don't seem to get this, but like there's so much backdoor prompting of inefficient and basically insane businesses through like propping up rentier models, that you do see something like this. It's just not, it just doesn't look like the way Marx is describing the lumpen here.
No, it looks like startup bros.
Right.
Like it looks like, I'm gonna be Bill Gates, like kind of like cult shit. Like, I don't know, like if you go to Silicon Valley, there's a bunch of like startup bros that have little cults of personality, get people to work like 70-hour weeks, on like sweat equity and bullshit. Like it's like starting a newspaper.
Right. And
anyway.
Oh my God.
I want to talk about that too, because like there's a lot of people right now in America, particularly around the disenfranchised parts of the DSA, who are like picking up on this Nagelite language. And like, that's a code, and it's a code for like basically right ethnicism, honestly. And for a class that not only doesn't exist in the United States right now, really hasn't existed that way in the United States since probably the middle 60s. So like in a way, like one of the things I think is going on is trying to turn trying to turn like even working classism into a kind of identity politics, which is fucked up. And I think you see something like that here. I mean, I kind of do.
Yeah, well, that's the
Like
that's the danger.
this is why I love you, Derek, because like nothing of what you said has anything to do with the text we just read, but it's so interesting that I don't want to cut in and like. Anyway, moving on.
I agree.
Speaking of the Brumaire, like, I just want to sit back and listen to whatever you have to say, and not give a shit about whether or not it's related to what we're actually talking about.
Hence, we have a 40 episode fucking reading.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you could get more of this from us chewing on this. Derek and I recently read a book for Swampside on. Like a reactionary text on managerial society. We'll also be talking about this on Mortal Science when we talk about like laws of history and whatever. But I actually do want to move on to that last paragraph where, first paragraph, libs owning themselves and royalists owning themselves. And second paragraph, lumpen conspiracy, Alex Jones Marx into like awesome poetic flourish about, the self-own of the libs. And then the third part about the Cossack Republic. If you're a student of Russian history, the Cossacks are this like, kind of quasi-ethnic sort of like, I don't know how you describe them, sort of cowboyish, rancherish, they had sort of had a democratic culture. They had an on again, off again relationship with the Bolsheviks. I think they eventually got folded into the Soviet Union's like national kind of like pride thing. Could we get a little background on what that Republican or Cossack is about and what the Cossack Republic means?
Were they not like a kind of a warrior class as well?
Yeah, they were a warrior class that claimed some like relationship to like basically Asian steppe warriors, and so
is that where the name for Kazakhstan? Does Kazakhstan come from Cossack? I always wondered.
I think maybe it's the other way around. I think Kazakh may be related to Cossack, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I don't want to do folk etymology here. One of the things I think is interesting about this is like it's basically the violent, destructive form of the American Yeoman Republic, which is also an impossible form because yeomen don't still exist. But like it's a very similar idea. Like everyone thinks they're a Cossack or everyone thinks they're a yeoman, live free. I can live on the steppes. We can do whatever. And we have this like nascent, quasi-democratic tradition as long as you're one of us.
But I think in this particular case, what Napoleon was referring to was the threat of Russian illiberal autocracy. Right.
Yeah, that's
the opposition to the Republic.
Okay.
It's not. He's not really talking about the details of.
So it's illiberal. It's illiberal liberal democracy, which like you want to talk about rhyming with stuff right now. Like that's.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's what the Cossack Republic is. Right. Is like it's the Republic, but with the kind of like degenerated autocratic nature of the Russian Empire. In it. So like, because, for Marx, this is like a really important distinction, right? The French Revolution versus Russian autocracy. Like, because he was like a big conspiracy theory guy about Russia and like had that as like a job for a while, right? Was writing conspiracy theory stuff about Russia.
Oh yeah.
So Marx,
Russia is Marx is proto-Russiagate. And the reason why, in part, is the crushing of
yes.
Don't tell Glenn Greenwald. That'll make him more of an anti. Anyway,
but the thing is
that's
that
the
like
best part about Marx, to be honest with you. When you read him, it's like, all right, this is more Alex Jones unhinged stuff, but it's like Democrat Alex Jones. It's like Rachel Maddow stuff, Russia.
That's not better.
Well, I'm just saying he whips out the chalkboard and makes like a crazy ass mouth foaming conspiracy theory.
People need to stop whipping it out. Okay.
Yeah, just keep the chalkboard in your pants.
But yeah, he's saying that the Bonaparte has combined these two things that his uncle saw as antithetical.
Yes. Okay. Can we move on? We've only done one page. Okay. Esri, seeing that you're talking, do you want to take this next bit?
Yeah, let's fuck it up.
All the way down to rifle butt.
Awesome. Why did the Paris proletariat not rise in revolt after December 2nd? The overthrow of the bourgeoisie had yet only been decreed. The decree was not carried out. Any serious insurrection of the proletariat would at once have put new life into the bourgeoisie, reconciled it with the army, and ensured a second June defeat for the workers. On December 4th, the proletariat was incited by bourgeois and shopkeeper to fight. On the evening of that day, several legions of the National Guard promised to appear, armed and uniformed on the scene of battle. For the bourgeois and the shopkeeper had learned that in one of his decrees of December 2nd, Bonaparte had abolished the secret ballot and had ordered them to put a yes or no after their names on the official registers. The resistance of December 4th intimidated Bonaparte. During the night, he had placards posted on all street corners of Paris, announcing the restoration of the secret ballot. The bourgeois and the shopkeeper believed they had gained their objective. Those that failed to appear the next morning were the bourgeois and the shopkeeper. By a coup de main, the night of December 1st through the 2nd, Bonaparte had robbed the Paris proletariat of its leaders, the barricade commanders. An army without officers, averse to fighting under the banner of the Montagnards because of the memories of June 1848 and 1849 and May 1850, it left to its vanguard, the secret societies, the task of saving the insurrectionary honor of Paris, which the bourgeoisie had surrendered to the military so unresistingly that, subsequently, Bonaparte could disarm the National Guard with the sneering motive of his fear that its weapons would be turned against it by the anarchists. This is the final and complete triumph of socialism. Thus, Guizot characterized December 2nd. But if the overthrow of the parliamentary republic contains within itself the germ of the triumph of the proletarian revolution, its immediate and obvious result was Bonaparte's victory over Parliament, of the executive power over the legislative power, of force without phrases over the force of phrases. In Parliament, the nation made its general will the law. That is, it made the law of the ruling class its general will. It renounces all will of its own before the executive power and submits itself to the superior command of an alien of authority. The executive power, in contrast to the legislative one, expresses the heteronomy of a nation, in contrast to its autonomy. France, therefore, seems to have escaped the despotism of a class only to fall back under the despotism of an individual, and what is more, under the authority of an individual without authority. The struggle seems to be settled in such a way that all classes, equally powerless and equally mute, fall on their knees before the rifle butt. Man.
So
this is quite dense.
Yeah, one of the things I want to talk about first off is has anyone ever? Yeah, you knew where my mind was going.
Love it.
Do you ever see Marx certain Marxist uses text to justify the abolition of the secret ballot? You know, when they invoke post-1921 Bolshevik reforms to voting.
It's the opposite. How could you possibly?
Because
I've never actually seen them deploy this text.
I haven't either. That's why I'm asking, has anyone ever done it? Because I know that, for example, even a lot of Trotskyist groups do not use secret ballot and do open form slate voting based off of the post-1921 Bolshevik voting structure, which did away with secret ballot and had slate voting. And I've always wondered, like, how do you read something like this and think that Marx thought that would have been acceptable? I know their arguments. They never invoke Marx. They talk about, well, you need to have accountability to the collective or whatever. So I'm like, so accountability to the people who already control the guns.
No, it's to allow voter intimidation and to subvert democracy. That's what it is. Marx believed that would be so, or at the very least,
he acknowledged it would be so.
He acknowledged it would be so, and he saw the secret ballot as something in the proletarian class interest, right? Like, and in a sort of just democratic class interest. Like, it's brought up here.
It's more about the sort of general procedures of democracy than it is about the proletarian interest. But he sees the value of it for sure.
Proletarian is stretching it, but he recognizes it as like a sort of democratic good that prevents this sort of intimidation.
Right. All right. I'm just interested in there's a lot implied here, because there actually is a very complex notion of democracy, formal democracy in the state, and law. The other thing I'm thinking is there's a lot of people in the kind of like wackadoo, anarchist adjacent structuralist left who are now telling me that law and credit precedes political power in the state, and which, I've heard that before. If anyone's ever read LaSalle, because that LaSalle believed that law was class neutral, but like, how can you when I read a text like this, it's so clear that like it historically doesn't work that way, like at all. Like law, any law that pre-exists for the class interest of the people who are currently in charge, and democratizing that law without abolishing it seems like doesn't do much. Like, it actually makes it unstable and weird and more likely to be repressive. So I don't know.
He given the day that's in it with the passing of our queen, Miss Ruth, what's her name? Ruth.
The notorious RGB Ruth
Bader Ginsburg.
RBG, yeah. Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
RGB is the video signal thing.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Ruth Green Blue.
The notorious CMYK. Yeah.
Yeah. So whatever. Marx nearly never mentions law too much, or the courts or anything in the entire book. It's just something that you pointed out today, Kyle.
Yeah. Well, it comes up very briefly in the discussions of Napoleon's appointees and the struggle over the state. But I think it's also important to remember that Supreme Courts weren't really a thing yet at this point in time. They kind of came about shortly after this period. Well, I don't know how shortly, but it was just not really. The judicial power was not the same in France at this time as it is in the U.S. right now. It wasn't institutionalized the same way. And so I think Marx treats it with a little interest, because it just seems like one type of bourgeois appointment among many others.
Right. One of the things
this also kind of harkens back to.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Derek. All right. So I think this is also Marx harkening back to chapter 2, where he kind of made the point that why do you have a legislative authority that is decided upon by Parliament, i.e., so the legislative branch is supposed to be assembled by a representative average of the population, whereas in the executive branch, the entire vote is focused on one person. And so, of course, the executive power is going to win out in the end. What the hell were you thinking? And so that's kind of how I interpreted this part, as him throwing back to his not overt but kind of implicit prediction in in chapter 2, where he was like, well, you've ensured that the legislative branch is going to argue all the time, and you've made sure that the executive branch can make decisions at any time and veto shit and fire everyone in government and in the governmental agencies, and they also have complete control over the military.
And we're going to see, though, by the end of this chapter, the contradictions of a unitary executive in response to, like, modern class society, right? Like, that distinction between the legislature as a bunch of bickering bourgeois factions, or even in the original phase of the bickering between the royalists and the social democracy and the Bonapartists, and then on the other hand, you have, the unitary executive, one person who embodies the whole nation, right? But then when we get to the end of this chapter, we're going to see when you have an emperor of a modern nation that is divided by dynamic class conflict, he ends up having to do a lot of just kind of juggling, stealing from one person to pay the next, and desperately trying to keep the plates up in the air.
Which is exactly how he gained power in the first place, by playing the mountain against the party of order, and playing the party of order against the bourgeoisie, and playing the bourgeoisie against the party of order, and so on. I guess my general point was merely that I don't think he's making a point that is anything like, oh, law is just a bunch of bourgeois bullshit, or like the parliament never does anything real. It's just arguing all the time. I think the point he's making is you've built a system where, on the one hand, so like to get Zizek, like on the one hand, you have democracy embodied in parliament, but on the other, you also want dictatorship. Of course, dictatorship will win out in the end. Like that's kind of the general gist of it.
But law is not is not actually stem. The way that this is written, law comes into the parliament too, as if it exists outside of a parliamentary procedure, because who has advantage in representation takes it into it and then codifies it. So in a way, he's also proving that it was never really all that democratic either. And in the United States case, to go even further, the judiciary and law is separate from legislature. And common law is not like common law predates legislative fiat. Like it's actually just assumed from common custom and tort law, which is true in Anglo countries in a way that I think some Europeans kind of forget, that like a lot of our laws are literally customary and have been like and are just assumed because of custom and tort around custom, going back to like high period medieval Europe.
Yeah, this is why no one understands Anglo-Saxon law.
Well, you know what's even weirder is when you have the few states in the United States that operate off Napoleonic Code as their substitute for Anglo-Saxon common law, and like those leaders always end up going to prison. So like
Oh my god!
No, I'm serious. Like, look at Louisiana. If you're governor of Louisiana, you have a almost like flip a quarter whether or not you're going to go to prison at the end of it. I mean, like, so it's the way the legal system works in the United States, and the splitting of the judiciary from the executive, because I think that's unique to U.S. inspired democracies. Like, that's not totally true in the UK and Canada, is it?
Actually, it's somewhat more extreme in Canada.
Interesting.
The Supreme Court justices are more or less elected by the bar. It's essentially like the corporation of the lawyers and judges who come up with the list and then choose the person on the list, and the governor general basically just gives the royal assent. So the PM and the legislature have no involvement in choosing who is on the Supreme Court. And this is actually what ended up stopping Stephen Harper from conquering like full state power here. Like he got into government, he crushed the unions. He also managed to crush the state bureaucracy, and like basically use like Bolshevik tactics to destroy them. Like he built a parallel shadow government to put them all under his thumb. But the thing he could not beat was the corporate power of the lawyers. They just had too much social power, and he could not get the Supreme Court under his thumb because of that autonomous power that they had.
Yeah, that wow. So if anything, it's further from the party machine.
Yeah. Like the legislative is even less connected to the judiciary in Canada than it is in the U.S.
This is why I sometimes feel like the only Marxist who likes lawyers.
Well, I mean, you know, I'll give them credit for stopping Stephen Harper. You know, that dude almost killed my father. So, you know, I like his efforts to crush the bureaucracy gave my father a heart attack. I do not bear any goodwill towards Stephen Harper. he's a bad person.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of like the hate against like any sort of legal stuff is a very American phenomenon. Like usually,
darn tootin'.
For a lot of countries, the problem is exactly the opposite. That the bourgeoisie and capitalists get away with illegal shit, and that lawyers don't have enough fair trials and enough power. But like, you know, the U.S. is weird, is what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, if he makes you feel any better, there's a lot of Marxists out here that are probably mourning notorious BRG or whatever. Like, you know, so there's a lot of Marxists that love lawyers. If only, like Marx, they had read Democracy in America and read a conservative being like, hey, don't worry, democracy is just going to create this like this, you know, pseudo aristocratic caste of lawyers that'll crush any popular will. Like, so Marx is astute on that.
Whoa, Jesus!
Oh yeah.
Tocqueville says that, and he's like, I always tell people, go read de Tocqueville because he's actually really prescient.
No, he's great.
What's happen in America? Like, all this democracy is going to invert on itself and create weird aristocracies. I mean, and the other thing is, like, the American left liberals and also American labor, honestly, has learned through habitus that law is on our side because it's the only weapon we've been able to deploy since we can't politically unionize and our unions are captured. And,
it's more like a weapon that goes off and hits our enemies sometimes. Sometimes it hits us, and sometimes it hits our enemies. And
that sounds like your gun laws in general, though.
Yeah, fair.
Most of the time it's just
harsh.
Hey, listen, at least there's like a rational agent pointing those guns sometimes. Like with the Supreme Court, and like, yes, you do have decisions from on high. Like, all right, let's not have like you know, marriage apartheid. Let's make gay marriage okay now. Handed from on high. Praise be the courts. And then you set up a cargo cult around the court, and then they do something like strip basic like campaign finance reform. And then you're like, I must whip myself for the gods.
That's kind of baffling
I betrayed the gods.
is how like most of U.S. law seems to be entirely based upon Supreme Court predicates.
It is. The Supreme Court had the right to define the law. Like the Supreme Court gave itself the right to define the meaning of the legislature, and it did so like kind of arbitrarily. It's not actually in the Constitution, but since it can interpret the Constitution, it can do it now. And nobody but. Unfortunately, the only people who've ever really opposed that have been like crazy wackadoo quasi-Bonapartists like Andrew Jackson.
So like speaking about your point about like recreating feudal relationships in America, like I actually haven't read de Tocqueville, which I promise I will. But like I was watching American Housewives of Beverly Hills with my wife.
Oh, hell yeah. That's some cultured shit right there.
That's a cross-cultural exchange. I've been to IKEA.
Yay.
Seriously,
Emmanuel. But like what hit me was, you have a nation, like so going through school, we were told about like, these rebel colonies and the Boston Tea Party and the wanted to be independent and overthrowing feudal relationships and being free from the crown. And what do? Like the fucking second you get rich in America, what the fuck do? You go build your own fucking feudal castle
with a
out of fucking plastic or like marble and shit.
Yeah.
And you buy a fucking island and you want to own people. Like it's like we want to be free from British feudalism so that we can do feudalism except worse. And it's like you also have like all of these all of these rich people are related in each other in exactly the same way that like feudal the queens and princes or shit are related to each other, except you don't have anything more than like a 60-year history to base it on. So it's just like it's just like a fucking parody of, of monarchy.
Like all the way down in the society, like the tabloids that are popularly consumed are like jerking off over like the British royal family, and then like middle class liberals write peons about how like the American Revolution was all racist, and if we really want to be good anti-racist, we should have supported the British side, and the like the whole thing all the way down is this it's this sense of loss that we took away our Disney princesses, there's like a national Romanov feeling.
Yeah, it's like European monarchies, except there's less inbreeding and more illiteracy. Like it feels like that's kind of the only difference.
Well, I mean, honestly, again, writing a book on Christopher Lasch, I'm not, I'm going to bring this up all the time because I'm a dirty, stinking plugger. But no, seriously, one of the things I noticed, he points out the old family names actually like really were an aristocracy by the end of the 19th century. And then what we have now is like a mockery even of that. So like most of our celebrity rich are new rich. But there is in the United States old power families that are aristocratic that are now 400 years old. And if you trace like a lot of our politicians, and again, sadly, it's usually crazy wackadoo right-wingers who do this, but like Obama is related to George W. Bush. Like, because his white side of his family comes from a power family that traces itself back to the old New England families, just like the Bushes do. The first bourgeoisie here have effectively become aristocrats over the first 200 years of the nation's history, and they solidify.
Here we have it. We have leftist confirmation about bloodlines.
Oh God,
this is a great revelation.
I tell you,
yeah, I feel like you're gonna get an email from Infowars pretty soon, Derek.
Yeah,
an invitation to go on Infowars.
Oh shit! Maybe we could get some. Maybe we could get.
Even the Marxists admit it now.
Yeah, Alex, if you're listening.
One thing I did not expect to hear today on the podcast was, well, I haven't read de Tocqueville, but I have watched Beverly Hills Housewives. What the fuck?
We're nothing if not cultured, Tom. I mean, give us some credit.
It's the millennial excuse for a proper education.
I will just say one thing about the whole thing about American royalism is that most Americans were dragged kicking and screaming into opposing the crown in the revolution.
Yeah, that's true.
And
too.
the ones who were actually anti-monarchist were a minority who were defeated. And so it's like, you know, it was circumstances that pushed them into separating from the British Empire. It was not a strong ideological hatred of monarchy.
No,
they really
they wanted to crown Washington. Yeah,
they loved English gentlemen. They wanted to be just like English gentlemen, and they loved the king.
And to be honest with you, some of our least problematic founding fathers were basically fucking royalists, aka John Adams. When I say least problematic, is because he's the least sexist and thought slavery was wrong. I mean, I bring that up because that is a thing in the United States, and also Kyle's right. Like the anti-monarchists were basically the people who prompted the Articles of Confederation, and in many ways, William Appleman Williams is right that the Constitution was a quasi-royalist cattle coup, Madison was trying, Madison, and even though it becomes kind of aligned to the anti-federalist later, in the Democrats, were trying to kind of split the difference and create a society where you could have something like a king, but it's still manifestation of popular will. And you had a very smart political thinker like George Washington who would be like, I'll take the powers, but you can't call me your excellency.
Yeah. And that was mostly that's the role of an individual in history. If it wasn't for that, there would probably be like a literal monarch.
But I mean, we have this tendency in the United States because we're always trying to pop up both on the U.S. liberal right and the U.S. liberal left, a unitary executive that could stand above and beyond the legislature. I mean, FDR operated on similar themes, and it's just become a Republican thing since the War on Terror. And probably Nixon. Yeah. Nixon's usually somewhere in the hinge in all this, but yeah.
Yeah. To very last thing, and then we should get back to the text. But another reason for the judicial kind of hatred in the U.S., at least a good historical reason, is that the Bill of Rights, the Republican compromise for this like constitutional, like quasi monarchist counter coup, was basically gutted immediately by the courts that just seized on some ambiguities and they had to like refight to make the Bill of Rights apply to every state by one individually.
To the states until the Civil War.
Yeah.
The Bill of Rights did not apply to state governments until the Civil War. The states governments could do whatever the hell they wanted to until after 1865.
So yeah, like pretty much through most of the history of the United States, the courts are unambiguously an anti-democratic institution, and I don't know, liberals and leftists here have lost their goddamn minds.
Well, it's weird because it's basically only the Warren Court in the 60s that does anything like what they think it does, and that is a weird one-off in history that is literally trying to avoid kind of what they're afraid of as an identitarian civil war. Like they don't want Civil War Mark II.
Like it's hilarious. If you watch Democracy Now, I'd say 50% of their guests are lawyers. Is that right? It's like every single one is a fucking lawyer. It's true. It's
you're right.
Look, the Whigs won in America. Okay.
Whig party system. All right. Let's what did any of that have to do with what I read?
It has everything to do with what we're talking about and nothing to do with the paragraphs. Let's move on.
Yes.
But what about the paragraphs?
We talked about them. We can move on. It's okay.
We can move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll get back into the executive legislative split. Famously, Marx in the Paris Commune was like, "Yeah, jam them shits together. Let's get things done."
Yeah.
So
okay, Emmanuel, how do you feel like putting some Swedish honey on this?
Bork. So let me see. Yep, right. So it's from but the revolution is thoroughgoing, right?
Yep.
Where are we? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, all the way down to Victor.
So
the
those
chief spoils a Victor.
all the way down. All right. But the revolution is thoroughgoing. It is still traveling through purgatory. It does its work methodically. By December 2nd, 1851, it had completed half of its preparatory work. Now it is completing the other half. It first completed the parliamentary power in order to be able to overthrow it. Now that it has achieved this, it completes the executive power, reduces it to its purest expression, isolates it, sets it up against itself as its sole target in order to concentrate all its forces of destruction against it. And when it has accomplished the second half of its preliminary work, Europe will leap from its seat and exult, "Well burrowed, old mole." The executive power, with its enormous bureaucratic and military organization, with its wide-ranging and ingenious state machinery, with a host of officials numbering 500,000, besides an army of another 500,000, this terrifying parasitic body, which enmeshes the body of French society and chokes all its pores, sprang up in the time of the absolute monarchy, with the decay of the feudal system which it had helped to hasten. The seigneurial privileges of the landowners and towns became transformed into so many attributes of the state power, the feudal dignitaries into paid officials, and the motley patterns of conflicting medieval plenary powers into the regulated plan of a state authority whose work is divided and centralized as in a factory. The first French Revolution, with its task of breaking up all separate, local, territorial, urban, and provincial powers in order to create the civil unity of the nation, was bound to develop what the monarchy had begun, centralization, but at the same time, the limits, the attributes, and the agents of the governmental power. Napoleon completed the state machinery. The legitimate monarchy and the July monarchy added nothing to it but a greater division of labor, increasing at the same rate as the division of labor inside the bourgeois society created new groups of interests, and therefore new material for the state administration. Every common interest was immediately severed from the society, countered by a higher general interest, snatched from the activities of society's members themselves, and made an object of government activity. From a bridge, a schoolhouse, and the communal property of a village community, to the railroads, the national wealth, and the National University of France. Finally, the Parliamentary Republic, in its struggle against the revolution, found itself compelled to strengthen its means and the centralization of governmental power with repressive measures. All revolutions perfected this machine instead of breaking it. The parties, which alternately contended for domination, regarded the possession of this huge state structure as the chief spoils of the victor.
Well, that's a hell of a last two sentences. Let's reread them there again. All revolutions perfected this machine instead of breaking it. The parties which alternately contended for domination regarded the possession of this huge state structure as the chief spoils of the victor. Ouch.
Which is why you're all Italians.
I mean,
ain't that true?
Well, I mean, this even reflects on like the latter Engels.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's
yeah, we were talking about last night how Engels said like, yeah, you can use the state levers to help the working class, but he still ultimately wanted to break the machine at the end of the day.
Right, but and
even Marx
I think
did.
Also like breaking, yeah, for sure. But I think also like breaking the state, like if you're a Leninist, right? Like we must break the bourgeois state machinery is what he says in State and Revolution. But it doesn't matter. Like the state machinery throughout the subsequent, all the different like revolutions in France, technically it was broken, right? But then they just rebuilt it and made it more centralized every time until you get to this point where you have this farcical Bonaparte running shit and like robbing Peter to pay Paul in a grand societal scale. So, you know, I think just gesturing towards breaking state machinery isn't enough. And like, you know I dunk on anarchists a lot, but I think like we have to be like one step removed from anarchism to avoid these pitfalls.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I actually agree with Wayne Price in some ways that the platformist anarcho-Marxist. I mean, he'd get mad if I called him a Marxist, but he's a Marxist. He agrees with capital and economics almost entirely.
He's a lowercase m Marxist.
Yeah. But he says like Marx understood the class state, but in trying to stop the devastation of the social collapse that would come due to all the dependencies on the state, and also hold a coalition that still kind of believed in the state together, that Marx kind of tries to have his cake and eat it too in regards to the state machinery. And I think in some ways this ambiguity does haunt Marxism, because we're constantly redefining ways not to have to deal with it. And I know there's one justification for not immediately smashing the state. You know, Douglas Lane was like, well, if you read the Critique of the Goethe program, in the part where there's still bourgeois institutions and social forms that we haven't totally gotten rid of, if we get rid of the value form, we wouldn't necessarily get rid of the state. And, you know, the state will wither away because all the other apparatuses that support it will go away. Because, like, how can you have a state if you don't have taxes, etc.? You know, how can you have a state if you don't have a monopoly on currency because you're not using those kinds of currencies at all? But it seems to me we never, ever get, like, this is still true, that all revolutions perfected the machinery instead of breaking it. I mean, like, when you look at, like the Bolshevik Revolution, and I'm going to have some Soviet defenses come at me for this, but like, I think largely one of their biggest failures is they left a lot of the Tsarist apparatus together. Still, they just appropriated it for, you know, for the working class supposedly, but like let's be honest, like the NKVD is based on the Oprichna. Like, it's not like they didn't really like get rid of even some of the forms that predated.
What's the NKVD?
The Secret Service, the KGB, isn't it, or the Secret Police?
The Secret Police. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Check it, baby.
Yeah, it's based on right. It has that form goes back in Russia all the way to Ivan Dostoevsky, Ivan the Terrible, or Ivan the Awesome, depending on how you translate that from Russian.
Ivan the Tubular. Yeah.
I mean, but like Stalin, you know, I know a lot of liberals make a lot of hay about this with Stalin, but it is true that Stalin like had a soft spot for Ivan Dostoevsky because of the centralization of the state into this one figure, and the creation of like states within states and formal and informal heads, you know, like, because Ivan, like, at one point Ivan like has a government within the government which rules the government, and like you can actually see that in the Bolshevik, in like some of the ways that, you know, the late, you know, high period Stalinism organized the Bolshevik Central Committee. So like they didn't smash it, is what I'm saying. Like they started to, and then they didn't. In fact, they centralized it. And like you know, no matter your opinion on what the Soviet Union was, like if it was state capitalist, non-form, whatever, you cannot deny that they created the state apparatus for a very kind of brutal and coarse bourgeois society to emerge after 1992.
Speaking of the centralization, decentralization thing. Sorry, Ezra, go ahead.
No, yeah, like they also created a similar kind of like a hybrid, like czarist, like faux republican kind of form that was way less stable and like well thought out than the American Revolution, honestly. Like, you know, once the Soviets failed, once they were like, yeah, we're not actually going to use this as a platform for government. And I don't know, it's always been sort of a mystery to me, like, especially when I was a Leninist, how like yeah, but they like killed a bunch of them, like those aristocrats, and they smashed the state apparatus. They proposed an alternative form, but it was really the road to like reconstructing everything from like state orthodoxy and like, I don't know, like it's like the Bolsheviks, you know, they wanted to strike out against their father, and then one day they wake up and they're 40 and they're carving up Poland with Germany, you know, like
you gotta grow up some point, kid.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how much of the czarist apparatus, and like you're gesturing towards Derek when you're doing like a mode of production analysis, it's hard to figure out like how exactly that class dynamic squares with the old czarist kind of like feudal class dynamic. But the state is obviously like a hybrid bourgeois czarist form. Yeah.
It's the Cossack Republic.
It's the Cossack Republic.
Oh, Lord.
I've also heard similar things argued sincerely, even by some dissonant sinologists, that you have similar things with the relationship of the CCP standing in for like the imperial court in China, because a lot of the relations of like the rural peasantry in China actually does still mirror the relations to the official like imperial state, and with like all these corrupt middle officials that are allowed to function under the state and then appeal, and then you can appeal to the CCP as the mediator against like that. Those are like, even though like I think ultimately China's like in some kind of weird hybrid bourgeois production form, like they still like, none of these revolutions have actually rooted all of it out, which means at minimum they're incomplete. And in many ways they're not just incomplete, they recapitulated in a worse form. You know, like the irony of the American Revolution, right, is the people who are supposedly fighting for a form of economic liberty, like create the most unequal society the world has ever known. And that's true for all the bourgeois revolutions. And a pretty highly unfree society, frankly. There's much less incarceration in these late feudal societies than there are in, I mean, the only people who got messed with in these late feudal society were like aristocrats who opposed the like, you know, they kill peasants, but they weren't like doing all kinds of shenanigans to mass imprison peasants. Like that would get rid of your workforce.
So looking today, right, we've seen how like the parliament was destroyed by the executive power, right? And we've just witnessed like the crushing of like two left experiments in America and the UK. And I don't know what it's like in America so much, but I can see in the UK here, like the entire establishment of the bourgeoisie press is totally like joined forces to defeat like Corbynism or a mild social democrat kind of option here. And like the Tories now that are in power know that the press won't be after them. So the level of corruption, like when I was growing up, in Ireland, we used to look to England as being less corrupt than Ireland. Like Ireland was incredibly corrupt, you know, where like our leader was just like buying islands and shit. You know, he was like literally worth, you know, many millions with no income, and no one ever said anything. There's open corruption in Ireland. In the UK, it never seemed to us like that. But now we've got like absolute open corruption in the Tory party. Like it seems like that move of defeat has allowed say the Tories in England to be just openly corrupt, and the press won't go after them because they're afraid of a renewal of a Corbyn or something like that. Are we seeing like some kind of a degeneration of our current kind of ruling class norms? Like all of these scandals that have come out over the coronavirus stuff in the UK for giving like no tender like what you call it, contracts to people, to organizations that literally the companies don't even exist. Like literally don't exist. They give them £130 million contract. They've only been incorporated 2 weeks. Are we seeing some kind of weird degeneration US side as well. Like you see the obvious open corruption in the US. So like
we have
what does this mean? What does this mean for us?
We always have.
Well, but the difference is now, I think the difference though, Emmanuel, is prior to the last 10 years, they were legal, they were within the bounds of bourgeois legality. Like that was a major difference. Like if you wanted to talk about the difference between corruption in Latin America and corruption in the United States, is corruption in Latin America was illegal and corruption in the United States was formal through lobbying and thus legal. However, we are now in the case where even like it's become so obvious that there's no repercussions for it, that like quid pro quo and stuff, which priorly would just not be allowed, because it took the legal face off of the corruption endemic in the system. Like what you're seeing now is a lot of like the formality that made it okay just being removed and being open. What I think is more fascinating about that to me, I mean, not just that it's happening and it's a sign of degeneration. I mean, all those things are true, but that what that means is in some ways like bourgeois power can't figure out a way to legitimize itself. And a lot of the liberal anger at Trump's gaucheness is anger at making a lot of the unspoken, I mean, you know, during the Bush administration, Halliburton, and honestly, Democrats have done it too. If you know how Chicago works, like you see, to make all these unspoken, like we don't do this explicitly, we do it implicitly, just out and out, you know, there. And the only thing that stopped it priorly was basically norms and a few legal reforms after Watergate. And to be exposed how much of the society like open corruption it's just like open now. It makes liberals mad, but I think it sometimes makes them mad because it exposes how much was actually there before. Like, I mean, when you talk about like the crap that's happened in the US, like I'm almost in like a weird anti-imperialist, but it's kind of true. Like we've been doing that crap to other countries for forever, and what the liberals are mad at, it's not that it's happening, but it's happening at home. Like, and so there's this way in which like things have broken open to the point where all this stuff is now undeniable, and it's also clear that no one can really do anything about it. Partly because I think if you really do, I mean, like, I'm just going to say a name. The Hunter Biden scandal does have a real scandal underneath it. Like I've seen liberals try to like just kind of like flip that around, but there's real scandal there. And like, it's just funny because basically it's the pot calling the kettle black, except now the kettle's like not only am I black, I'm going to pay everything black. And yeah, I mean, it's crazy what you're seeing, but it's also true. Like we also know like useless political appointees are a huge thing and have been in government for a long time, but there's supposed to be certain agencies where you bracket it off because they're too important, and that stopped. But the United States worked that way for most of its history. Like that's how you paid people off up until the 1930s, is you gave them political appointments. Like that's how it works.
In Canada, we have the Senate, which exists solely for the purposes of buying off political allies. It's an entire house of government for bribery. So it's the replacement for the House of Lords. And because we don't really have lords, we just have people who are friends of someone in power.
Yeah, but like the dynamic seems to me be a real obvious dynamic of the actual ruling class kind of moving into an open kind of not going to say degenerate, but like an open corruption phase. That's I think certainly like in looking at UK politics, like for example, I don't know if any UK minister has been made to resign of these Tory this recent government with scandal. Every week there's a scandal that I think in the past would have been resigning scandals and would have had to have resigned, and it seems like that it's going to this very crude and obviously kind of open corrupt kind of a rule that harkens to me when I was reading this chapter. It I don't know. It rhymed.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the standard of corruption that was existing at this time in France, for sure. Like you talk about like, you know, Bonaparte's kickbacks that he got as president, or like the ways that the bourgeoisie was using the legislature to enrich themselves. Like that shit was absolutely happening at this period of time. And it certainly didn't get any better once Bonaparte got into power, you know.
Yeah, there's I'm trying to answer Tom's question with regards to, like, you know, does it seem like things have changed with regards to like with regard to the Sanders campaign? I mean, I think Corbyn is maybe in the mind's eye of the UK more than Sanders is here. It's almost like Sanders never existed, other than journalists being like, yeah, the socialists were defeated in the Democratic Party. These people are, you know, anyway, like, but as far as like corruption being more kind of like, I don't know, things that people would have gotten like destroyed for now being more commonplace. Oh yeah. And not a problem because people are more craven. It's 100% on point.
Yeah. Even in Canada, that's becoming an issue because, like, you know, Trudeau had this huge kickback scandal with his like friends and family, and kind of seems like he's just going to get away with it, which is really not a thing that would have happened 20 years ago. The Liberals would have been out, and the Tories would have been in, no matter how vile they would have been in government, because people were just like, no, you can't let them get away with that.
I mean, blackface usually gets someone canceled, right? Like that's a cancel. That's like I think a fairly cancelable offense, right?
I mean, you know,
I'm not exactly sure that I. So maybe it's just because I don't. I haven't been following international news as much as I should be, but like it seems to me with all the shit that Thatcher had going on, and with Halliburton and the Iraq War being obvious conflicts of interests, and on my own home turf, Lundin Oil in the 1990s, whose board member was the Swedish Prime Minister, an oil company that essentially funded war crimes and terrorism in North Africa, a terrorist organization which ended up kidnapping 2 Swedish journalists while a member of the board who funded the terrorist organization was the actual PM. No one raised an eyebrow around that, and that was 30-ish years ago now.
Yeah, but the difference is it was in other countries, and it was in other countries in the place of bourgeois law. Like I really think you're not wrong that about the difference in. About how corrupt the past regimes have been. What is different now, and what people are mad about, honestly, is that it's no longer foreign soils, it's no longer word profiteering, and it is now like stuff directly in the home country. You're directly appointing political appointees to wreck municipal services within the home country. You're doing it's bringing the bullshit home. That's actually I hate to sound like a conservative, but triggers to live.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
And it doesn't seem to be happening as much in Central Europe, you know, and you guys in Sweden But like, if you look at all the main powers, I don't think it's happening.
It's definitely happening in Central Europe. Look at Hungary and Poland.
Oh yeah, that's true. What about is that happening in the Nordic countries though? Like, because all we hear about the Nordic countries is you shit rainbows and you're probably really communist, but it's good.
I mean, it is happening here, and I mean, we can talk about that all night long.
Another day.
If we want to. The only thing I would like to sort of add to that is like this is kind of what my day job is. So this is European Union public procurement law is one of the things that I work with, and it's designed. I mean, it's maligned, at least in Sweden, both from left and right. The right wing, pro-free market, libertarian wing hates it because it very effectively combats corruption, which is kind of what worries me when the UK leaves the European Union, depending on the agreement. If they get around the protections that are in place now, vis-a-vis how governments can issue contracts to private organizations and private corporations, if they loosen up that legislation, you're going to see a lot more of this, because the legislature as it is pretty watertight. It has a lot of backsides, but what it is extremely good at is combating this type of corruption.
Is Europe going to bomb the UK to enforce its agreement? Because if it's not, you've already lost.
I fucking hope so. If not, I'll get my brothers at home. I'll get them on the job again. We can't get them with the treaty.
Yeah. So, but I mean, there's a larger point here, because that same law, while it does almost make it impossible for nepotism and like knowing, rich people knowing each other, that kind of corruption, what it does is it very effectively empowers the bourgeoisie as a class. So it's very effective against corruption on the individual level or on the corporate level, but it really does. The way it does that is by essentially enforcing an extreme form of free marketism, and so I guess that kind of brings us back to Marx and his points about the bourgeoisie and the aristocracy being kind of enemies, but also kind of not.
Right. I mean, I think that's a brilliant point, and I think that's also why in America you see a lot of the biggest opposition to Trumpism is from the biggest corporations. My brother, who's a liberal Democrat, was literally coming to me the other day, and he was like, you know what? These days, I think the people fighting for the people in America, is the largest corporations. The small corporations and the unions and everything else don't seem to be able to do anything, and everybody else seems to be benefiting from the grift around Trump. And I was like, that's the wrong way to read that, but I know why you would, because the large corporations are mostly actually in rentier systems and all this stuff where rule of law is really important to their business model. And that's also kind of why, like, we talked about this in the other day, but kind of why there's this class interest in like a state that's not parasitic. It's also interesting. Maybe we should go to, because this will actually be relevant to the next section. Can we go to the next section, Tom?
Let's do it. I was just going to bring us in.
Yeah, you're just highlighting the funny passage. This terrifying parasitic body, which it enmeshes the body of French society and chokes all its pores. I don't know. Yeah, but Marx is pro-state though.
That's for me, like this, like that sentence there. It's like any socialist communist movement that's worth its name has to have that as a part of its core understanding, and it has to have actual fucking plans and ideas about how we can dismantle the state, and not just a wishy-washy dismantle the state.
It'll fix itself,
slogan.
Tom. It'll fix itself.
It'll
fix itself.
hypertrophy. You make it strong enough, and then it'll just
die.
So what you do is you just smash it, and we'll just cooperate. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. We'll just cooperate.
Or wait, we'll smash it and then immediately build it back because we miss it.
Okay, let's read one more section here before we go off for tonight. Let me see now. Where we go? Where do I have it off to? Okay, down to itself. Oh fuck, that's a long one. Okay,
I can do it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, no rushing through there, Derek.
All right.
Your best teacher voice.
But under the absolute monarchy, during the First Revolution and under Napoleon, the bureaucracy was the only the means of preparing the class rule of the bourgeoisie. Under the Restoration, under Louis Philippe, under the parliamentary republic, it was the instrument of the ruling class, however much it strove for the power of its own. Only under the second Bonaparte does the state seem to have made itself completely independent. The state machinery has so strengthened itself vis-a-vis civil society that the chief of the Society of December 10th suffices for its head. An adventurer dropped in from abroad, raised on the shoulders of a drunken soldiery, which he brought with whiskey and sausages, and to which he would keep throwing more sausages. Hence, the low-spirited despair, the feeling of monstrous humiliation and degradation that oppresses the breast of France and makes her gasp. She feels dishonored. And yet, the state power is not suspended in the air. Bonaparte presented a class, and the most numerous class of French society at that, the small-holding peasants. Just as the Bourbons were the dynasty of the big landed property and the Orleans, the dynasty of money, so the Bonapartes are the dynasty of the peasant, that is, the French masses. The chosen of the peasantry is not the Bonaparte who submitted to the bourgeois parliament, but the Bonaparte who dismissed the bourgeois parliament. For 3 years, the towns have succeeded in falsifying the means of the December 10th election and in cheating the peasants out of the restoration of the empire. The election of December 10th, 1848, had been consummated only by the coup d'etat of December 2nd, 1851. The small-holding peasants form an enormous mass whose members live in a similar conditions but without entering into the manifold relations with each other. Their mode of production isolates them from one another instead of bringing them into mutual intercourse. The isolation is furthered by France's poor means of communication and the poverty of the peasants. Their fields of production, the small holdings, permits no division of labor in its cultivation, no application of science, and therefore no multifariousness of development, no diversity of talent, no wealth of social relationships. Each individual peasant family is almost self-sufficient, directly produces most of its consumer needs, and thus acquires its means of life more through an exchange with nature than with intercourse with society. A small holding, the peasant and his family, besides its other small holdings, another peasant and another family. A few more scores of these constitute a village, and a few of the villages constitute a department. Thus, the great mass of the French nation is formed by the simple addition of homologous magnitudes, much as potatoes in a sack form a sack of potatoes. Insofar as millions of families live under the conditions of existence that separate their mode of life, their interests, and their culture from that of the other classes and put them in hostile opposition to the latter, they form a class. Insofar as they are merely a local interconnection among these small-holding peasants, and the identity of their interests forms no community, no national bond, nor political organization among them, they do not constitute a class. They are therefore incapable of asserting their class interest in their own name, whether through parliament or a convention, and they cannot represent themselves, they must be represented. Their representatives must be at the same time appear as their master, as an authority over them, an unlimited government power which protects them from the other classes and sends them rain and sunshine from above. The political influence of the small-holding peasants, therefore, finds its final expression in the executive power which subordinates society to itself. And this hits me like a core because we don't have peasants anymore, but we have a lot of classes or adjacent classes in the United States that operate like this.
Yeah, exactly. There's a bit here. Let's just read these two sentences together just to make it explicit, right? Insofar as millions of families live under conditions of existence that separate their mode of life, their interests, and their culture from those of the other classes, and put them in a hostile opposition to the latter, they form a class. Insofar as there is merely a local interconnection among these small-holding peasants and the identity of their interests forms no community, no national bond, and no political organization among them, they do not constitute a class. You know? Like, look at today in America. There's a that describes the proletarians.
Yeah, it does.
So that's kind of the deal, right? Is that this is a theory of class formation that is highly dependent on being able to identify and articulate your interests.
Well, I mean, it's not just that. Like, I was talking to my co-author, Shalom Van Tyne, and she pointed me out that Marx actually explicitly has two different notions of what class is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is the more like how
and that they overlap. Like,
yeah,
so like
it's a class for itself kind of definition.
Yeah. A class in itself, class for itself.
Right. And she was pointing out that most Marxists go willy-nilly in between the two, depending on what they want to do, as if one is actually the same thing as the other. Right. But they both exist in Marx. Like, Marx both has a sociological and a political explanation for what a class does. What worries me about now when we talk about the working class in America is there a chance that after industrialization and the franchisation of a large section of the working class into smaller and smaller bodies, like franchises, is the alienation of the working class in the developed world actually somewhat similar to that of the small landholding peasant?
Right, because when he calls the peasantry a sack of potatoes, which you often hear trotted out as, yeah, Marx thought the peasantry was a fucking sack of potatoes. He's like, fuck them. But the point, I mean, and it's no doubt derogatory, but the point here is that they are
atomized.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they're not actually in intercourse with each other. And I don't know about you, but recently things have seemed pretty atomized recently, eh? But that's only really an intensification of trends that have been going on for decades and decades and decades.
But the question then becomes, like, if the working class, the proletariat, is becoming atomized as the peasantry was in a process of being swept up into the dustbin of history and replaced by the proletarians, what's replacing the proletarians?
The communards, the communists.
Robot.
I mean, kind of robots, kind of like some kind of, I don't know, Huckleberry Finn.
Well, but here's the thing: the peasants were also atomized like this for thousands of years.
Yes,
like
that's what I was going to say. Is going from the stable form to the unstable form, and then the unstable form to the stable form, doesn't mean that the second stable form isn't stable. Right, that atomization could be perpetuated, but like let's look at Marx's explanation for why they are a sack of potatoes, right? Like, so they form an enormous mass who live in similar conditions, but without entering into manifold relations with each other. Okay, like that's more or less true of proletarians these days. Like, not in a like they enter into economic relations with each other, but not manifold ones. Their mode of production isolates them from one another instead of bringing them into mutual intercourse. And it's not really explained why, but it's easy enough to understand what Marx is getting at, because, like, oh yeah, you have a family farm, it's a plot of land, you work the family farm, you're mostly eating your own food that you produce, and that perpetuates isolation. We do need to think about, like, what about the modern proletarian mode of production would produce the same consequences, because the second thing that Marx brings up, the isolation is furthered by France's poor means of communication and the poverty of the peasants.
That's not true. Yeah,
that's not true.
Like, we absolutely do not have poor means of communication.
In fact, we might have too much.
Yeah, like the means of communication are like, you know, as manifold as you could fucking ask for.
Right.
And the poverty of the workers, well, yeah, okay, you know, that's certainly, the immiseration is real, but maybe, like, probably not to quite the same degree as the peasantry. Furthermore, so he goes, their field of production, the smallholding, permits no division of labor in its cultivation, no application of science, and therefore no multifariousness of development, no diversity of talent, no wealth of social relationships. Like, except for that last bit, that's certainly not true today.
I actually disagree with you.
The division of labor has actually been just, like, negated by automation.
If you work in the service sector, the automation has divided labor so much that you actually do work most parts of this of a job. But it's also because the division of labor is also done by different companies which you do not interact. So it exists, but it has been chunked out to the point that you don't. That's no longer an interface for most people.
Okay, I think that's the crucial point. That's the crucial point there, right?
But
that's the gap that allows the atomization.
I think there's two different.
Isn't this precisely Marxist point in the Communist Manifesto? You know, with where they talk about why the proletarian class is the only revolutionary class, is precisely because capitalism has provided means of communication to the proletarian class. Proletarians can now, read literature. They can get education. They are part of a social mode of production instead of a parcellated, isolated, atomized mode of production like the peasants are. Like,
so I think
isn't that part of the argument?
Yeah, but if you look at where the proletarians get their education from, and so much that they get it from the state. That it's now an incredibly hostile education that seems irrelevant to them, so it doesn't form a lot of strong social bonds. I hate to be like almost a proponent of capital decadence theory, but like there is a real sense in which the division of labor has gotten so good it's fallen back on itself, and the socialization functions and education increases that we saw across the board in the developed world is stopping and slowing down. Like, that's a fact. Like, the developed world saw the end of the Flynn effect.
But that's not what Marx is getting at in the Communist Manifesto.
Well, I think also
the point he's getting at is
developing this thread. The idea of the working class getting like more and more smart and well-read and literate and educated is completely stopped up by and kind of disproven by what Derek is saying. And so I think Derek is actually kind of right here. Like,
but his point is not that the working class is getting smarter. The point is that the bourgeoisie has provided the working class with means of communication, which is true. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking to each other right now. It has provided the working class with literacy and with education and so on. It's not that the working class is getting smarter. It's that the proletariat does not have any use for the bourgeoisie anymore. So, like, if we had a socialist revolution tomorrow, right, and a capitalist comes and asks, well, who will run the nuclear power plants? Who will run the machines? The proletariat can just answer, well, we already are running those machines. We know how to work this stuff.
Except they can't. They actually cannot do it. You cannot have the proletariat, as any member of the proletariat, actually explain how the nuclear power plant works. That is cartelled off by opportunity hoarding. This is what actually led to. I mean, there's a reason why the frustrated revisionist Marxist became the people who came up with managerial theory, because they're like, well, there's this other almost a caste, not a class, of people within the proletariat itself and adjacent communities that is hoarding this information so that the proletariat cannot use it for itself. And they start coming up with theories as to why. I mean, that's a lot of Pareto's obsession, but they started off as Marxists because they were trying to explain that very problem. Because you can't give any.
I'm not sure.
I think a lot of that's over. That's right? Overrated. Yeah, I don't think that's like, you go look at, say, computer programmers. Like, they may be well-paid proles, but they're still proles. Like, I don't go for that idea that, like, most of the best software is not done by these, like, really high up people. They're mostly done by fellas in their 20s who are proles. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah,
you are talking about a field that actually that also exists and doesn't produce. Never mind. You actually appeal to parts of the fucking of the economy that actually work very differently, and in which, if there were not legal protections of the state, would not be profitable.
Okay, but let's look at something like, say, like the telecoms. It's the same people, the same people who are computer programmers are essentially the same people who are telecoms engineers, who are essentially the same people who are nuclear engineers. Not all of them are managerial.
Well, I actually don't buy the managerial thesis, but I think the falling back of the division of labor upon itself is something that you have to look at, because no one single part of the proletariat can assume all those functions, and there aren't incentives.
But they already are.
No, they don't.
Of course they are.
Have you ever worked in a fucking, like, an actual job, like, that you weren't the boss of?
Yes.
Okay. Could you do all functions in it?
Of course not. But that's not Marx's point. Marx's point is that the proletariat as a class is doing all that, not that every individual can do everything.
Right.
But you're missing the point.
In this conversation, we're conflating kind of two theories of proletarian interest, one of which is more like historically bounded, and the other of which Marx at least believes is more essential. Because we're right in saying that what Marx is describing here is not just his read of the French peasant situation, but also contains his general class interest theory of the peasantry, right? And like a lot of this idea, like the collective worker thesis, that we were going to get, the Kautskian idea that we were going to get a more disciplined, more socialized proletariat that understands every facet of the machine and is ready to run every part. That, I think, is manifestly disproven by the trajectory of the 20th century. But that's not actually what we're looking at here. Like, what we're looking at here is, like...
Yeah, that's not what Marx has said at any point.
Yeah, that is not Marx.
That's Marx's theory.
You have to explain.
That is why the proletariat as a class has to unite, because no single proletarian knows everything about how the economy works.
Exactly.
That's part of what it means to have a division of labor, and that's why the proletariat.
But flip it on its head. Quit regarding Marxist piety to me and actually do some fucking objective, looking at the goddamn existence in society. The reason why you don't have unified proletarian class interest is under capital. As of right now, it is not clear that there actually is a unified proletarian class interest, because certain parts of the proletariat can capture opportunity from other parts of it. And Marx doesn't seem to think that can happen, and yet it does.
Yeah, so the underlying theory that survives is something like what EndNotes calls unity and separation, that there is a sort of like detachment from property, like, literally as in like not really owning productive property. And the kind of opportunity hoarding that Derek is talking about, like, still basically applies to them, but it would have to go, the current incentive structures, like, would have to further degenerate and immiserate those that are getting those rents in order for them to feel their common class interest. And like, EndNotes feels like it's such a dismal situation that it wouldn't even be thought of in class interest. It would be thought of in relationship to capital.
Yeah, and basically local.
Yeah, and I think Dirk, you're making a very astute point, which is kind of I believe, the weakest point of Marx and Engels' theory of the proletariat as the revolutionary class, because although I think the argument is very convincing that in general that only the proletariat can be a revolutionary class, because one, the proletariat is by definition all of those who do the actual goddamn work in all societies. So they're already producing as a class all of the goods and services that we have. So nothing will change there. And two, they don't own any private property. So they have no interest in letting go of private property, right?
Right. Well,
as a general point, I think that's true. But your point, Derek, is, I think, hits at something that I think they kind of gloss over. And
I think Marx was actually
how will you get the proletariat to realize their interest and their common interest as a class,
which I think is why you see late Marx and Engels worry about things like labor aristocracy, frankly. And I think that's why, even though it's incoherent and I hate it, you see like the PMC thesis, which is the ironic thing about the PMC thesis, though, is like, if you really read it truly, a lot of people are actually mad at the PMC because they're being proletarianized. Like, that's weird. Like you're mad at the PMC because they're being forced into some conditions like the working class. Then what is the working class, and why are they different? Like, I don't buy the managerial thesis entirely. What I do think it's both an illusion for, like, it's a distraction from, but like the way that this division of labor can be used by the bourgeois, not just to like, I mean, like, if you look at the proletarianization of the society, developed world is actually like what, like 80. If you look at people dependent on the wage fund, it's like what, 90% of the population, really? Like, only the top CEOs and top management get paid enough out of like capital investments to be truly independent of wages.
That's the division. That's the bourgeoisie,
right?
By definition, yeah.
Right. So like, and that bourgeoisie is probably, I mean, what I think confuses all this in the United States is there's all kinds of state mediations that hide these relationships too, and I don't know if like Marx seems to be here realizing something he didn't necessarily realize in the Communist Manifesto, frankly.
No, and that's what I was going to get to as well. Is so the Communist Manifesto is written in the winter of 1847, published in 1848, right before all the revolutions of 1848. And so this is what I've been reading. I've been reading the revolutions of 1848 during the summer, and that's why it's kind of fresh in my mind. So from somewhere between 48 to 52, so right about the time when he gets to writing this, Marx and Engels sway from centralization to decentralization, and then kind of back again, in a way. So where in the Communist Manifesto they argue for centralization of the means of production, they argue for the proletariat taking over the bourgeois state, progressive income taxes, a lot of stuff that is essentially social democrat by today's standards, like a free education of all by the state, and so on. By this time, so there's actually a note in the reprint in 1880 something by Engels, where Engels goes back and says, no, dude, we were fucking wrong about this. What we realized after Napoleon III or the Brumaire was that centralization was exactly what made Louis Napoleon gain power, and decentralization would have kept him from doing that. So and we based our theory of like centralization upon this assumption, that it was it was all of these fractured classes and so on that would make the dictatorship of the proletariat impossible. But what we then realized was, holy shit, if you have everything centralized, you have a power of the state that is so prone to abuse. So what we really should do is just decentralize everything. And then they kind of swayed back and forth. But there's a real tension here from 48 to the beginning of the 1850s, where they're kind of rethinking a lot of what they wrote about in the Communist Manifesto, and that's kind of why quite so interesting.
Yeah, I've been studying this time period a lot too, Emmanuel, for the same reasons, like the time period between 1848 to 1920, like that. Partly for the Left project, but one of the things I've noticed is like the debates, like when you hear modern social democrats, God bless him, my friend Ben Burgess, and he is my friend, and I don't mean to like crap on him, but like he will just say like Engels endorsed the Erfurt program, and I'm like, Engels wrote a bunch of notes telling Kautsky like nationalization was a mistake, and that socialization and nationalization, despite what they may have said in the manifesto, were not actually the same thing. And like people just drop that out of the conversation almost immediately. And I mean, I think this does get to like one of the things I was thinking about in regards to this is like when we talk about the bourgeoisie in America, we know they exist and we know who a few of them are, but we don't really know who they are. I mean, because the bourgeoisie is almost like a formal relation, because we don't have like
the lizards.
Like we no longer.
It's almost like classes aren't individuals so much as relations of property.
Right. But there are writers who will pick up on early Marxism's anger at individual capitalists from what I like to like redeem like the quasi-heroic period of the bourgeoisie, where you had individual shop, ownership, and they could even like take one for the team as the bourgeoisie member of a single class for a little while, even though they can't do it ultimately. Like,
yeah, but that's a petit bourgeoisie, though.
No, it was like in the development of the big bourgeoisie, particularly in America, that was everybody at one point. Like the steel magnates could do that too.
All right.
Now that you have diffuse ownership of capital, like the corporation really does like manifest this in a different way. Like the bourgeoisie is the people who can own enough stocks. They're not the people who actually run the companies anymore. So I think Eric Olin Wright does get into this. It's hard for people to be mad at the bourgeoisie because they don't see them. A lot of people oppressing or dominating them in their lives are actually other kinds of labor aristocratic proletarian.
Yeah, right. It's almost as if class oppression is this spectral force of social relations and not individuals, and is actually an expression of abstract property relations that is out of the control of individuals.
It's almost like the bourgeoisie has reified itself to the point that it doesn't even really need to exist anymore. Like as a
wow,
you do get
new crisis theory.
Well,
I'm getting the
bong out. That's a classic.
Oh God, it's like this.
That's
this is how I yell at Europeans into agreement.
Do you see this one here about the sack of potatoes? And they're just lumps of potatoes in a sack that they've no interconnection. It's like, it reminds me of like what's that? The singular this idea of the singularity. I always have this like the turnip singularity. It's like if you just get a whole load of turnips and pile them high, that it'll just spontaneously develop like fucking awareness, self-awareness, like a turnip theory of self-awareness. If you just connect a whole load of like computers together, it'll somehow gain fucking some kind of intelligence. So that's Marx. Marx is basically slating He's basically, what he's doing here is he's slating the singularity. That's my take. Is that hot enough? Is that hot enough? No, I don't think it's hot enough.
You should have listened to the last episode of General Intellect Unit and Swampside Chats. That's a very lukewarm take compared to what they were talking about with the supercomputer taking over everything.
Well, I mean, that's actually like that's Douglas Lane's politics. Actually, is he thinks that everything can be solved by a supercomputer figuring out the value for him. But I actually do think the social relations thing that is really key because it also explains things like state capital. You really can have capitalism without capitalists. Like that's a real possibility. I know that sounds strange, but if you have a collective actor acting to exploit labor, even if it's reinvesting it into itself, it's acting as if it is a capitalist, even if there's no individual capitalist involved.
Right. The thing that's important is the social relation, not the individuals.
Now, there's one thing.
It's like Marx says. The capitalists are only personifications of capital.
Yeah. There's one bit here that I wanted to say about, like, so this is where he's describing about, like, there isn't a wealth of social relations in the peasantry. I don't like. It depends I don't know what he means here by social relationships, but like my parents grew up in rural Ireland they were peasants, small holding farmers who he's talking about here. And they knew everybody in their village. They had loads of interpersonal connections, lots of friends, all that type of stuff. The modern proletariat, like in the US, they've got fuck all interpersonal connections. They don't know their neighbors. They don't know anything. So I think that's a very, very big difference. And I think that there is, like, that is something that is, I think that there is capability there for a crisis theory in that, like, actual atomization that way, as opposed to this peasant atomization.
So I think one thing to clarify here is, so whenever Marx is translated from German into English, there's a difference between social and societal that often doesn't get translated because it's apparently the same word in German. So in the Swedish translation, what Marx is saying is that they have no wealth in society. Like they have no riches in their standing in society. Not that they don't have social bonds or family bonds or whatever. But
that makes
a lot more sense.
Yeah,
because
every time you read, like, so it's like socially necessary labor time, right? The word social there is societal, right? We live in a society.
right. Actually, I think this is like, honestly, I think the anti-Politico crowd, weird reading of Marx is based on that mistranslation. Like, seriously.
Oh yeah.
Like, the way they use social, like, goes back and forth between societal and then, like, just having social connections. And it's like, because the German is such a precise language until it's not. And when it's not, it's really not. Like, it's you know, like...
To be clear, you mean our Australian friends, and not like
Aussie Pole thinks that communism is the friends we made along the way. But like when I was reading this the other night, I kept thinking, like, is there anything at all to, like, the kind of Bakuninist, like, or like the kind of, like, idea of, like, the peasant commune becoming, like, the basis of, like, an agrarian socialism?
Well, like, even Marx thought that was possible in the Soviets and Russia. Like, he says that to Vera Zerlich. Like, but it was like a runoff thing because they never encountered capital. The moment the peasant encounters capital, that form doesn't work anymore, and it becomes far more atomized, which I think is true. I mean, like you think about what is the closest thing to peasant relations in America? Because I was thinking about, like, the way, again, book writing, Lash, he talks about the working class in 1820, and he's referring to sharecroppers, and I realize they're not working class. They're actually non-feudal peasants. It's like the closest analogous when we actually had them. Because what do? They subsistence farm, and they pay in kind.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
So sharecropping is like our big way of saying, well, we don't have peasants because we never had feudal relations, but we had this weird capitalist formation that pretty much fucking looked exactly like peasantry, and also involved a ethnic and racial minority of people a lot of the time. And shut up. But I think it's interesting because that's part of the obscured relations in America, and as far as like understanding our own history and our development towards capitalism. But it's also interesting in that we don't like when we talk about peasantry, we're also talking about a lot of areas like in Ireland are like when I talk about peasants, when I go to talk to like real peasants and like indigenous areas in like southern Mexico and Guatemala. All right. And I've been there, but that's a place where capitalist relations barely exist, and it exists in like a corner store. And it is, whereas you think about like the sharecroppers in a capitalist society, they are pretty damn isolated. And I guess so what these small peasants would have been. So like I think like the village small town life, yeah, but like the no social wealth does actually translate to like not a lot of connections outside of the small area. Yeah, they might know everybody in the area, but they don't have any way to really mobilize it. They don't have what a normal sociologist would. So so they are different in German.
Yeah. But I was just gonna shout out to Jara. So sozial and gesellschaftlich.
Mm.
Does that have different meanings? Social and societal, respectively. Yeah. But and that may very well be the case. I've just noticed a lot of times in the English translation, the word is social, and in the Swedish translation, it is societal. And I just can't believe that's a coincidence, because a lot of times it makes one of those terms make a lot more sense than the other.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that too, because like I said, I was thinking about the anti-pole, and I know gesellschaftlich is the word they're translating in the social. And the one quote they always cite against politics.
No, isn't Gesellschaft society? In German? So Gesellschaft could be societal.
Yeah, Ossipol is rolling with a mistranslation.
Mistranslation is what I'm saying. Like I've suspected that,
and basing their whole viewpoint, their whole Marxism viewpoint off of that mistranslation.
Although to be quote fair to the Australian school, the Baudrillard makes the point in The Divine Left that there's always this kind of like reification of the social that runs through Stalinism and like all forms of what we would call 20th century like socialism, and it's a very conservative strand that's sort of lurking inside of socialism.
I have no idea what any of that is or what it means, but it sounds cool.
French brain.
Australian. What's that? Australian?
No, okay. You remember like
let's not go there.
Yeah.
All right.
What do you call it?
He often uses gesellschaftlich, and it's usually rendered in English as social. All right. Okay. Yeah. So that's interesting. That explains why it's societal in Swedish. Then
we have a lot to fill you in on, Emmanuel.
Yeah.
Do I want to know?
No,
I
you
feel
don't.
Like
Let's
the,
go.
The
Let's
more
go.
I
Focus the text.
no.
We're not doing it now.
Let's go here. Okay, here. Let's wrap it up. Is there anything we want to say more about this kind of this paragraph before we wrap up? Because it's 2.5 hours on here. It's nearly.
I think there's more to be said about. I think there's more to be said about it, but like we'll have to address it at a different time. Like just this question of how specifically this isolation manifests itself in the proletariat is interesting to me. I'd like to talk about it more in the future, but not right now.
Which is why cybernetics is our salvation. Let us move on.
Save us, giant computer god.
Yeah.
Save us,
Unity. Your only hope. Just the quip about, hence the low-spirited despair, the feeling of monstrous humiliation and degradation that oppresses the breast of France and makes her gasp. She feels dishonored. is the national mood of the libs in the U.S. for sure.
Yeah, it really is.
Oh,
It
yeah,
really
it is. It is. It is.
I mean, the libs need to grasp more press. Is what I say.
But I mean,
you say grasp more press.
It is very much a like, how dare you make all our shit obvious? Like,
yeah. My word. Yeah,
It's like
it's very pearl clutching. So
isn't it? It's the Wizard of Oz moment, isn't it? There he is. There's a wizard. He's a little shit guy. Fuck this.
Yeah.
Let's kill him.
And he's wasted on whiskey and chomped full of sausages.
Yeah, touching up the girls. You know, the children, no doubt.
So is the opposition. So
okay, Tom has gone over to the QAnon verse apparently.
To be fair, both our leading candidates are kind of
are
touchy. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No.
So yeah.
Let's go to the chat. Let's go to the chat and say hello to everybody who's been on. We've had Grimlock, Daze, Red Tide,
Booyah!
Madaby Ruben, KGB operative, who's back.
Tiberius.
Yeah, who's quite old now. KGB operative. Erica
they used to use a Roman name, so that's even older.
Okay, yeah, it's Stank.
We got Stank. We got
Stank. Grimlock.
Omar.
Alex Marquez. Omar. We got Puya popped in for a minute. Who else have we got?
Lex. What's up, Lex?
Field. Yeah, Lex is there. Christopher Varn. Don't know who that is. Never heard of it.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Oh God, you used my Goyim name.
Yeah. Derek, you just got to give Google an initial. Don't give him the whole thing.
Yeah. Benjamin Hanshu.
If you put in the first name category, initial and then preferred,
it's actually
middle name.
Because I mistakenly used my work email. It's because I have to use my. But if you notice, I don't normally come in as that. I normally come in as Derek.
So people in work call you Christopher, do they? Is this what you're telling us?
They don't call me Christopher, but they make me legally use my first name because everything ties to my licensure. So,
what you mean?
But it's actually kind of useful because people have a harder time finding out that I do this shit. So,
Yara, Handala, Spectral Theory, anybody else? That's the whole lot. Let's take it offline. We'll talk. We got the whole chapter done just like we thought we would.
I never thought we would.
Oh my God, we're like a third through it.
You were
Jesus.
What was going for it? It was Kyle who said, "Oh yeah, we'll just finish it next week." Last week, and now he's
this is like when we said that we do a revolutionary theory in 4 episodes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we were so wrong.
Yes, we were.
We were.
Derek, you're the teacher. You're the one who's supposed to rein it on schedule and staying on topic. I blame you.
I am the worst.
Lesson plan. Where's your fucking lesson?
I am the absolute worst at this. If you've ever heard me on other podcasts where I just talk about whatever the hell I want and no one can stop me.
Derek is the kind of teacher who you're glad to let them go on rants because then you don't have to worry about what you're studying and it's just kind of more fun.
Yeah, it's like a substitute teacher that wheels out a really interesting VHS video, but it's themselves saying awesome shit.
It's like Zizek, except not on drugs, and
I am
and a lot more
days.
interesting and well read.
Yeah, and less transphobic and immigrant bashing. Anyway,
I blame Lacan.
Cheers, comrades.
Yeah, let's
catch you next
all
time.
blame Lacan.
Bye.
Bye.
Yep.